All right, we are live. Hi, everybody. I am Sherry Redwine, owner of Odyssey Pets in Dallas, Texas. Each year, we dedicate a month to highlight pet supplements and how they can help improve and extend pets' lives. During this year's What's Up with Supplements month, we are delighted and humbled to have Billy with Green Juju join us today. Billy is a leading voice in the pet nutrition industry and currently the Vice President of Nutrition and Communication for Green Juju. Billy is an expert at breaking down the science behind developing natural pet products that create real and lasting benefits for dogs. Welcome, Billy.
Thank you. For some reason, I don't know if until this moment I put together that your name is Sherry Redwine. That is an amazing
Yeah,
name, just in general. So
yeah.
maybe
My,
I had just been reading it in my mind or something.
my parents had a sense of humor, so I kept my last name when I got married. So,
That was a
but,
smart move.
yeah.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate being here. You know, any opportunity I get to connect with stores, especially ones that are, educating in nutrition and doing that part of it, that really is the connection with the consumer. So I have more than a lot of respect for everything you guys are doing at the store.
Well, thank you. And I hope we can drop some knowledge nuggets today that will benefit some people. And by the way, if anybody's watching this in replay, you can always catch it on YouTube as well. And if you have any questions, you can always reach out afterwards. But give us a little background on you. Who is Billy?
Well, so I've been in the industry like I think 12-ish years, and I am kind of I guess I could phrase it as kind of like the American dream version of what I did for my job. So I am 100% self-taught. I dropped out of college after one semester, and I essentially got my dog at the time, Lua, and asked myself, what do I feed this dog? Because my brother was very allergic to pets when I was growing up, so he had we had no pets growing up. I was very scared of dogs. Actually, I was that kid who was like, please put your dog away if I'm coming over. I was that scared of dogs growing up.
Wow.
And so I got this pug and I was like, well, what do I do? How do I feed this dog? And that question is just never endingly interesting to me. And it's all I think about really on a daily basis. I think a healthy amount of obsession can sometimes be what sets people apart, whether it's healthy or not. It's, what I talk about and think about most of the time. So I worked for 2 years for free to get my foot in the door with a company, and then worked my way up in that company into the formulation side of things and the science education part of things. And then moved over to Green Juju and do formulation with Kelly Marion, the owner. And we're a very small company, so we both do a little bit of everything and sort of keeping the company running. Um, and I think what my story tells is that there is no secret information. There is information, especially in today's day and age, that everyone has access to. You can learn as much as you want. You don't have to have a certain degree. You don't have to do all these things. I've spoken at many veterinary colleges, that kind of thing. So the cool thing is, if you're watching this, you can go ahead and learn everything I've learned and more. It's just really up to you. So that's kind of the short version of where I come from.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. Let's get into why is supplementation important, in
Yeah,
your
so
opinion?
supplementation I think is generally important to especially the average pet owner, because we've been sold on an idea that pets should only eat one food. And I really think too that, you know, when you look at the model by which we feed pets, so we just released a freeze-dried food that's complete and balanced, right? And I do this because what is complete and balanced? Every dog is so different, every cat is so different. We don't know exactly. I can't formulate a food that's exactly right for your dog or cat. And I think that's where supplementation can come into play when it comes to that. Whether or not you love our sourcing, but you want a little bit more fat, or whether or not you want to, add our greens, which is kind of how we design that line to begin with. But sometimes I think that the model that we use in a for feeding, so there's this model that was developed by large kibble companies, and we know they were using the wrong ingredients, right? But they wanted to make a product, say if you go to a grocery store and buy pet food or something like that. But they wanted to make a product that was complete and balanced and had everything, because they sort of treat dogs like feed animals, if that makes sense, right? Like chickens, you want one food, whatever it might be. So sometimes I think we go a little bit wrong, and we try to quantify everything when it comes to the natural side of things. We try to say, these are the nutrients we need in this proportion. But the whole point of feeding actual food is to feed actual food and have variance in nutrients and fats and all those different things. So, but I think in most cases, the average pet owner is feeding, a complete and balanced food. But you don't want to put all your eggs into one basket, especially if you're only feeding processed food, because we know, especially now, there's a lot better science on, fresh feeding, raw feeding in general. We know that animals need a diversity of food. We know that their microbiome suffers if they're only on one food, even if it's just raw food, just in general. So I think that's where all of these can come into play on the
Can
supplement side.
could I microbiome is a word that's getting thrown around a lot, and I don't think everybody really knows exactly what that means. Can you touch on that real quick?
Yeah, it's interesting because it is definitely something that's being talked about a lot now. I've definitely been talking about it, having dealt with fermented products and things like that for many, many years. And I think it's really cool because that's where we should be going in terms of health in general. So the microbiome is really the makeup of all of the bacteria in your dog's digestive system. And there's really two types of bacteria that you want to have in be sort of healthy and in good ratios. The first is the innate bacteria that exist already, that are just going to live there and that stay there. And so those are the ones that you want to make sure that you are feeding, and that that those are in good balance. And then there's probiotics, and there's those are the bacteria, whether it's probiotics, whether it's yeast, whether it's fermented foods, all of these foods that provide good bacteria, those are only going to be there like a day, or like up to 3 days if it's yeast. But you still want to inoculate with those on a regular basis as well. So you want to kind of do both of those things. So it's really the makeup of all those two types of bacteria in many, 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 many species, basically.
All right. Yeah, and gut health is increasingly important, and can help with a lot of different things, but that's like a whole other show.
Yes,
Um,
for sure.
Shoot.
I'll do my own plug. I'm speaking. I'm doing a lot of there's a kind of like I don't know if you call it a tour or whatever, but it's called the Judy Morgan Experience, and I'm speaking at I think 5 of those this year, and a lot of those are going to be uh, talking about the microbiome and breaking down some things. So if someone's watching this and they see the Judy Morgan Experience and you want to know more about the microbiome, I will be there.
Are you coming to Dallas?
I don't think so. It's basically like wherever like a store or organization wanted to do it, and
Oh,
then you
okay.
kind of like host it. So I don't
Okay.
think Dallas, but it'll be on our social media. So sorry, I just gave myself a shameless plug on your live. I
No, you're
apologize for that.
fine. You're fine. I'm gonna go check it out, actually. Uh, there's also been talk of, rotating supplements. Do you think that's necessary? And what are the benefits of that?
I do think it's absolutely necessary. And I think that whole food supplements obviously are better than non-whole food supplements. And what I mean by that is we should be striving to not, I think sometimes we can over supplement. And I think we need to get a base of actual foods in an unprocessed state. And the best supplement that we do things differently. So if you look at, say, we know now that mammals, when they have a better diversity of plants in their diet, meaning not the amount of plants, but the amount of different types of plants, that it feeds the microbiome better because there's not really a replacement for the different fiber types in a lot of different types of food. And so like a good example of that be if you rotate between our vegetable blends, you'll get 17 different plants into your dog's diet in that month. And that can go a long way in terms of providing that extra fiber. Um, we know that dogs that eat raw diets, for instance, don't have a diverse enough microbiome typically because they don't have a diverse enough diet. Because you probably know at the store level, someone goes onto a raw food, and then even if they're switching between maybe proteins in that brand, they're still doing that one food, which is much, much better than processed food. So rotating would be important there. And also just, I do that as well. A good example of that would be my dog is when I make up his little pill case deal with a couple things in each for each day. I put spirulina in it this week randomly because that's what I take, and maybe I'll do that next week. Maybe I won't. It sort of just depends. And especially the whole point of supplementation is to add in extra nutrients and diversify your nutrient profile. So why not rotate between them and diversify that as well if that's what you're going for in the first place.
Right. And that actually makes me feel better because sometimes I'll do a supplement and then I'll forget to get more and then I just get out of the habit and then I'll do a different one. So that's not a bad thing. I'm actually doing okay.
Exactly. So you're semi-consciously helping your animal when you don't even know it. So
Lazily doing it. Yeah. So synthetic vitamins, I talk about that a lot with customers. What is your take on that?
So synthetic vitamins are like sort of like a piece of a vitamin in most cases. So what that means is the best way I think to explain it is you'll notice it says if you look at like say a standard multivitamin from a store, it will say vitamin C as absorbic acid. But why would vitamin C need to be as something? Because because it's not exactly what you're getting when you eat an orange or when you drink raw milk or whatever it might be, whatever your source of vitamin C is. Absorbic acid is part of the outer layer of it. Or a good example of that would be so we have freeze dried treats, we have a freeze dried food, and you need to add a natural preservative to that. So there's two ways you prevent the fats in the food from oxidizing, and that's through um, the oxygen pack in the bag, and also the mixed tocopherols in our case. And side note, we're, I believe, the only company that actually uses specifically non-GMO vitamin E to do that. But they call it mixed tocopherols because the those are sort of the outer layer of rings of vitamin E. But if you were to eat an egg and get a vitamin E, for example, there would be other parts to that vitamin E. So that's a good, like the closest thing we can get to nature for a natural preservative. Um, but for instance, in our food, we made sure that there was enough vitamin E in the food itself. So you're not relying on that, right?
Mhm.
And so those can be useful, I guess, but what you want to do is get nutrients through food. And I would say the easiest way to do that is to supplement with things like raw milk is a good one. Raw milk has base. It's not gonna like blow your mind in terms of the amount of some of the nutrients, except for vitamin D. Vitamin D is a really hard nutrient to find in nature, and that's one that you don't have to supplement, but it has that baseline of basically everything. And then another thing too would be eggs or egg yolks, and that would be another way to supplement your pet's diet. Just make sure to, obviously there's calories. There's 55 calories in an egg yolk, so obviously, reduce the food or whatever you have to do. But those would be better ways to do that than the synthetic version, because the other part too is like, let's say you're feeding kibble and it already has synthetic vitamins on it. Why would you give another synthetic vitamin supplement? It just doesn't make any sense.
Right. And it's from my understanding, it's not as bioavailable. So they're eating these synthetic vitamins and they're not absorbing and using it. It's just going through the system, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's not as bioavailable because it's just part of it. And also, I mean, there's a reason why it's a little bit different now if you go to the human supplement industry because they have like whole food based multivitamins and things like that. But look at, a regular multivitamin, and they say, under no circumstance should you take this on an empty stomach because you'll get a stomach ache. That's probably, a pretty good red flag to the fact that it's not actual food.
Right, right. That has happened to me, and that totally makes sense.
That's
Um,
like the worst kind of stomach ache too. That's
it
definitely
is.
a long time ago that happened to me as well. And I definitely didn't make that mistake again.
Um, should we? I get this question a lot. Should someone supplement a healthy dog with no issues?
Yeah, I think a good example would be I have I don't know if he's a year and a half right now. I have a French bulldog named Huckleberry. Um, and we definitely have had to work through some. He is a raw fed French bulldog, and his mother was raw fed in a couple generations back, but he's still a French bulldog. So, we still deal with, but now that I've kind of like got him into a groove, I think, and kind of like fixed, some things, I still rotate between things because we're setting him up for the future. So a good example would be, rotating between our bison bone broth is one of my favorites. I love our duck bone broth. And that is not only to help his digestive lining just as a maintenance tool, but also to look at the total amount of hydration he's getting per day. It's also looking into the future when it comes to, glucosamine and chondroitin and collagen and all those important things for joints just generally. Because how many dogs do we know that, they're 6 or 7 years old and they're like seniors at that point because their body just isn't really responding. So it's all about how you set up your health in the beginning. And I would encourage people to look past exactly how your dog looks. When I was a teenager, I ate only fast food for the most part, like after I turned 16. And I looked exactly the same as I would have if I didn't, because my body was very good at processing those things. I turn 40 next week, I have mixed feelings about that. But if I ate that way today, I would get different results. And so it's better to set ourselves up for success. And I mean, just think about it more like you think about your health. Nobody thinks like, well, I'm healthy, so I can just eat whatever I want every day. Well, some people do, I guess. But, typically we don't think about human health like that. And we just have to think about, I think, dog and cat health like that as well.
Right. And I do want to touch on one more idea on this, and that's if you are feeding a processed diet, so like a dry kibble diet, um, any supplements that they put in the foods are usually compromised in processing. So I do recommend supplementing separately from that if you're going to continue with a diet like that. But fresh is always best. And obviously, we've covered rotation. But was there anything else you wanted to add to that?
Well, especially when it comes to like the probiotic content. You're not really going to get a big benefit from highly, highly processed foods. So putting in something like BAM's beets and actually getting those, the naturally occurring soil bacteria and that kind of thing, or fermenting our milk with, you know, probiotic or adored beast products or something like that, is going to have a much, much greater value. And you can kind of rotate between those things. And that's kind of the same deal. You don't want to get the same bacteria every time. So,
Right.
yeah.
Awesome. Okay, so when we spoke earlier in the year, you told me that you attend AFCO meetings, and I found that so interesting, and I really wanted to share that with my customer base and anyone that's watching. What goes on at these meetings? What is AFCO? A lot of people don't know what
Mhm.
that is, and then what's going on?
Well, I'm glad you find it interesting because it's very boring. Just side note. No, it is kind of interesting. So the reason I go, so AFCO is the feed officials who make the recommendations to the states uh, as to what the pet food guidance laws should be. So they don't actually have any regulatory power, but the states give them regulatory power because most states adopt the AFCO rules as their state law. So basically, what that means in a practical sense is you can't really make pet food in this country unless you abide by those AFCO regulations, because you would not be able to sell in most states. And a lot of people don't know we have to register in every state, and we have to do, there's a lot to it. And so basically, they have a guidance book called the OP, which is the official publication, which anyone can buy. It costs like $225 though, and there's a yearly update to it. So I go to these meetings mostly because I make food and need to figure out how that works. And it's not always as simple as it sounds. So especially when you're trying to make new products with new ingredients and that kind of thing, and really innovate, really in most technical senses, if the ingredients you're using is not in the official publication, you can't really use it in most cases, or and in terms of being in food itself. And so there's always a challenge there. And I have started especially to work a little bit more closely with my guy, the guy who's the Department of Agriculture guy here in Pennsylvania, and some of the other people as well, in trying to do that. And so basically how that works is there are committees that make these rules essentially, and the committees are made up of state ag employees, FDA, and lobbyists. And so, the meeting is about, I think it's about 500 people usually. By the way, anyone can go to these meetings, but it costs $500, and it's in a different place every time. So you got to pay for the hotel, and it adds up, which is probably why more consumers don't go to these things. But so basically, there are microphones, and you can kind of say, give opinions or say what you want on things, but they will adopt new rules and they'll vote on those new rules. And what the problem is that they lean very, very heavily on industry. And so, like, I couldn't go and be on a committee as a representative of Green Juju, but if I was part of a trade commission, or a trade group, then I could be a representative of that. So what you have is you have major corporations like Mars, Purina, that form organizations, and then they're on the committees, and obviously they have a lot of weight when those rules are made, or the render lobbyists, or association guy, or whoever. And so that's kind of, it's more industry, especially big industry, making rules for themselves in a lot of those cases. And that's really true, though, just generally of government when it comes to human food, everything, that kind of aspect of it, especially. I was talking to a gentleman recently who's in the pet food industry now, who used to be in DC politics. And he was basically saying that, all of the regulators on that side of things for human food, and what I would say the same thing about pet food, they're not always looking through things in a lens of science. So I could go to, FDA and say, well, here's the science on this and this and this. They're always looking through the lens of it, typically, with their career, right? So I want to be a food consultant for X, Y, and Z. And so that always goes into the decisions they make typically. I find in most cases that's a little bit different than, those committees, but I think it follows through that, it's more about sort of taking from other industries. Oop, are you there?
I think, yeah,
Okay.
we lost both of us there for a second, but we
Okay.
are back.
Oh, I was
Yes.
just gonna say, like, I think most of the reason pet food exists is to take byproducts and waste from other industries and put them somewhere, and that's kind of the main purpose. And so it's a very interesting environment. This year is in Baltimore in August. So
Yeah, one thing that I remember that blew my mind is that they allow a certain amount of plastic in feed and pet foods.
in feed, yes.
In
So
feed?
in
Okay.
feed. So, but that, I would say, that moves up the feed chain to you, right? So if you're um, cow that you get milk from ingests plastic, what is the nutritional consequence to you? I don't
Right.
really know, but I don't also want to be the guinea pig for, that experiment necessarily. So um, that, yeah. So the important thing for someone watching this to know as well, it's not just pet food. They actually also regulate feed for chickens, cows, pigs, that aspect of it as well. And it's kind of like pet food companies in general. I mean, I don't know if we're always. I don't think most of the time most people are looking at it through the lens of how do we make this um, animal healthier. What's the coolest thing we can do to make this animal healthier? It's more like how do we make what we consider to be a generally healthy diet within this weird industry and sort of like byproducts. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, and so
How
yeah,
how can like if a concerned consumer uh, thought this was interesting, is there anything they can do um, to change things? I do want to recommend Susan Thixton's The Truth About Petfood.com. She goes to these meetings too and lobbies for best pet nutrition practices. But is there anything else people can do?
yeah, she does great. She's the OG in she's the consumer advocate, and she's been going to these things for a long time, a lot longer than me. And she was going alone for a long time, so I'm happy to sit with her, and she's also just hilarious, just generally. But if anyone feels really, especially if you're a store owner or something like that, and you feel like really obliged, going one time would be really cool, especially if it's in your area. So there's actually, so there's a mid-year meeting that usually happens in January, and then the bigger meeting is in August. That's kind of the main meeting. But they actually happen in Texas semi-frequently. So San Antonio is somewhere where they had that kind of thing. So if somebody did want to make that commitment and come, you can literally come to the meeting, and when they're talking about these things in committee, you can go up to the microphone and say whatever you want.
Wow. Okay. So they actually will listen. Not, they may not do anything about it, but
Yeah.
at least our voice can be heard.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's one thing you can do. You can also listen to them live. They don't let you record it, or they don't record it. I don't know what the reasoning would be behind not recording it, but they don't. But you can listen to them live as well. But really going would be or just supporting Susan. She's that's what she does for her living, and so I think honestly, either going or number two, obviously that's a pretty big financial commitment just generally. But even just going to one meeting, but even if you just wanted to do something on that side, supporting Susan is probably the best way, because she is, it's a little bit different than in my case, because I work with these people, right, in terms of making products and getting them registered in states and doing, and so like I'm really don't consider myself to have a bad relationship with any of them. And I want to do things right and by the way that they're doing it. I think they appreciate that. Um, but in terms of getting things changed, Susan is definitely the go-to person. So I would, support her.
And again, that's thetruthaboutpetfood.com. She sends out really good newsletters too. But let's talk about Green Juju. What sets Green Juju apart from other pet supplement companies?
So we're really our thing, and this was really Kelly's vision from the beginning of this company. I know when I started, my whole goal there was to support her vision and where she wanted this company to go and bring what I could bring to that, in terms of on the nutritional side. And since the very beginning, she's done very clean, short ingredient panels. And it's because we're using whole foods. And it's because we want, rather than have a million different things in there that you might be getting such a low dose of, it's not really making that big of a difference. We want to have 8 vegetables, say, in our vegetable blend versus, a bunch of them and then a bunch of supplements in there and that kind of thing, because we want whole foods, and we want the body to break down those whole foods into their usable chemicals, because that's going back to what we were talking about before. That's the best way to get nutrition into the body. And so we are second to none when it comes to sourcing, whether it's the quality of the animals that go into the product, in terms of being grass fed or outside, or actually free ranging, or all of the organic produce we use. I mean, a good example of that would be, we have a product called Bam's Beets that's made here where I live in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. And when I go to Whole Foods and go to the produce section, I can see the purple cabbage there, and the beets come from the Lancaster Farm Fresh Co-op. And that's the same ones that go into, for instance, Bam's Beets. So when people talk about human grade, that's kind of a weird thing. So human grade is an actual qualifier that you can do, but to me, it doesn't really make any sense. Well, number one, raw foods can't be human grade because a human can't eat them, so that takes our freeze dried treats out of the running for that anyway. But what I like to say is human grade is not good enough. If you could find it in a conventional grocery store, it's not going to be in Green Juju food. And that goes for for the meat, and the meats we use, for everything else we use. And so I think we really pare it down, and I think we're relatable and approachable. And our favorite customer is the one who's using kibble, who just does something, who's doing just greens or our raw goat's milk, or whatever it might be. So
So this is the freeze dried version of the original frozen Just Greens. I say supplement, but it like food additive.
yeah. And
Yeah.
that one is important to note. So we actually go through the step of making it. We don't just get freeze dried powders and mix them together. We actually make Just Greens and then freeze dry it. And I think the other thing too is that's important to mention is we formulate all of our own products. It's not actually, you'd think that happens more, but it doesn't. And so we actually formulate all of our own products. When it came to the food, we did something that was completely unique in terms of the organ meat content, in terms of paring that down to 3 to 4 ingredients from an allergy perspective. And so, I think a lot goes into that. When we formulate it, we can do things that other people aren't doing, basically.
Which is amazing. And I do have a couple of like this is newer to you guys. This is like can be a treat or a topper.
Yep. Yeah. So we have a whole color line there. That's bison green and salmon blue. So essentially what we do is we pair organ meat, heart and liver, or salmon in that case, which kind of functions like organ meat nutritionally, with different color antioxidant subtypes. So blue in nature is going to be a different antioxidant type than, say, green. And so we mix colored foods with those, so you can get kind of still that low carb, highly efficient antioxidant profile.
And like on this one, there's only 4 ingredients.
Yep.
So this is great for dogs with allergies. Super healthy treat for sure, and cats too, right?
Cats, and actually our food is complete and balanced for dogs and cats. So one food.
Which is awesome. I've always wondered why it's separated anyway.
Yeah, it's actually, people think there's a huge difference. There's really not. Everyone's very concerned with taurine when it comes to cats. Organ meat is like the best source of taurine. So obviously we're not really worried about that based on the amount of organ meat that goes into our food. But the treats are amazing for cats and highly, highly palatable. And I think that's because of the amount of liver and heart in those. So I would highly recommend you cat owners out there. Those are great for very low carbohydrate, but getting that extra fiber content. And we know too that cats also benefit from eating high antioxidant foods when it comes to plants. They're not going to get the same things from dogs because they're obligate carnivores as opposed to carnivores, but they are still going to benefit from those things. And I would say too, especially when it comes to raw fed dogs and cats, I don't think most of them are getting enough vitamin D, enough fat soluble vitamins. So all of those are going to follow through in both our food and also those treats as well.
Awesome. And you guys just launched a freeze-dried full diet line, which we should be getting soon, but it's so new that we don't have it yet. But you can check it out at greenjuju.com. And if there's, what else is on? Are there any other resources that people can reach out to you about?
Definitely check out our YouTube channel. We post everything we do. There's training videos there. There's information on our products, and more continually there'll be. We like to kind of do. We did kind of like a little mini class on HPP. We recently did one on our food. We're gonna do more stuff like that. So if you don't catch it on Vision, when it comes to not wanting to do HPP, and long story short, I'll tell you where I started to have questions about that. And it's that I was at a facility that was doing HPP. And actually, about 2 weeks ago, I went to a HPP and freeze drying workshop in Nebraska, sort of conference. You can imagine how exciting that was. It was actually pretty cool. So I remember being at the facility, and I remember being under the impression that when you apply that much pressure, there's heat that's created there. But then I was looking at the temperature log, and it went from 41 to 43 degrees. And I was like, oh, I was wrong about that. And then I thought to myself, what else am I wrong about? Because if you ignore data because you want something to be true, then you're just not doing science anymore. You're not wanting to do that. And so in our class, we actually outline in terms of the enzyme content, in terms of the bacteria content, in terms of the digestibility, in terms of the nutrient content, why we understand there's obviously a market for non-HPP'd foods, but why HPP'd foods are still in a raw food state. And I would encourage people, if they say to themselves, well, I just think it's not raw. Well, that's not really an argument. And so I would encourage people to look at the data we presented there. Because I mean, when I go into something, I really go into it. A good example of that was in preparation for that class, I met with several PhDs that deal with the technology just generally. Another a lot of data from a probiotic company that was using it. Another partner that we used in that, who's done a ton of ongoing research, is Steve's Real Food. They really did. They're really doing an amazing job when it comes to the research aspect of that. And so I would encourage people to really take another look at it. And I think that the reason we did that class, because it's very easy for us to go like, hey, our food's HPP'd, but we knew that it was happening in the industry and that a lot of companies were probably like scared to talk about it because it has a negative connotation. So me and Kelly did that class because we were like, hey, this isn't something that we need to be scared of. If you do it, that's totally fine. Let's just put it out there so people can make the informed choice for themselves.
For sure.
So,
well, I need to do some more research on HPP now too. So thank you. All right, we're going to wrap it up, and I appreciate everyone who tuned in, and I'm hoping a lot of people catch this in replay because you dropped a lot of knowledge nuggets all at once. You are so full of information, and thank you for spending time with us. If you guys want to reach out to me, again, my name's Sherry. I own Odyssey Pets in Dallas, Texas. Info@odysseypets.com. I'm also on Facebook, Instagram, all that under Odyssey Pets. And Billy, was there anything else you wanted to say?
No, I just thank you for having me. I really appreciate being here. And also thank you to anyone who uses our products and trusts us with their pet's nutrition. It really does mean the world to me. I'm very lucky I get to do what I do for a living. So thank you. It's the stores that make that possible. It's the distributors, it's the stores, it's the people who use the product. So thank you guys very much.
Thank you. And you can get Green Juju products at Odyssey Pets all the time. So thank you guys. We'll see you later.